Alright YouTube, so we are back to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we have to talk about the ending to this game. It's pretty damn crazy. So since we're discussing the end of the game, it kind of goes without saying, but spoiler warning. So when we're discussing the end of the game, we're talking about the final cutscene that shows, for one, Biggs being alive, which is a major change. Wedge also survives, but that happens before the end of the game. And of course, Zack Fair living. So what the hell is going on, and what does any of this mean? I had to look into it myself, because I was honestly a little bit confused. And it turns out it all has to do with the Watchmen of Fate, or the Whispers as they become known by the end of the game. Or as Red 13 referred to them as, the Arbiters of Fate. And also, as Red 13 says, they are drawn to those who attempt to alter Destiny's course and ensure they do not, which we see plenty of times throughout the story. And once you look into it, it's actually a really, really interesting concept. So what we have here is what seems to be multiple timelines. You have the original story, the original Final Fantasy VII back on PlayStation. You have that timeline, and then you have the remake timeline, is what it seems like so far. And the way the Watchmen of Fate are working in the remake is anytime something strays from the course of the original story, they intervene to try to keep it on track. So I can show you guys a few examples of the Watchmen of Fate intervening from something different from the original story. Now, first up, we have the first encounter with the Watchmen of Fate whenever Cloud and Aerith meet in Sector 8. In the original game, after you do or don't buy the flower, Cloud and Aerith part ways, Cloud comes across the Shinra troops, and you do or don't fight them, hop on the train and leave. But see, in the remake, Cloud and Aerith just keep on talking up until the Shinra troops show up, and because that did not happen in the original story, the Watchmen of Fate intervene and kind of scare Aerith off to put everything back on track. Also, during the scene, we get a brief interaction with Sephiroth where he kind of alludes to the multiple timeline thing because he puts his hand on Aerith's shoulder, tells Cloud that he's too weak to save anyone. Obviously, in the original game, the original timeline, if you will, he killed Aerith. Another example of this is Cloud and Hojo in the Shinra building, and right before Hojo can inform Cloud that he was actually never a part of Soldier, the Watchmen of Fate intervene. And again, this is something that Cloud is not supposed to know till much later in the original story. Another prime example of the Watchmen of Fate intervening when something has changed from the original story is Barrett being killed by Sephiroth. He gets stabbed by Sephiroth and dies, but then kind of comes back alive. Or the Watchman of Fate that was in his body took the stabbed form or something. I don't know, it's kind of hard to follow, but either way, Barrett doesn't die here because he's not supposed to. So the Watchmen of Fate are like this super meta thing they put into the game to keep the story on track with the original, right? It's almost like the developers put them in there so that they themselves could not change too much. Or it's almost like the Watchmen of Fate are us, the fans, or the community. Like, we want them to remake Final Fantasy VII, but we don't want them to change too much, right? We love the original story, so it's almost like we're the Watchmen of Fate. This idea, this concept was mind-blowing when I started researching it. But by the end of the game, we fight the Whisper Harbinger, which is like the leader of the Watchmen of Fate, thus destroying, like, Fate itself in a way. Which is why we see the changes to the original story where Biggs survives, and of course, Zack also survives. Some other things that point towards this being separate timelines is when we get the reveal that Zack is still alive, we see this random bag of chips blow across the screen, and it has Stamp, which is like the mascot of Shinra. The thing is, however, if you paid attention, this is a Border Terrier wearing a hat, whereas in the remake, it was a Beagle wearing a helmet. Which are obviously drastically different logos, which tells us that Zack surviving is in a separate universe, timeline, whatever. Another example of this in the remake is the group at the end of the game standing exactly where Zack fought all the soldiers, but we see Cloud and then Zack and Cloud pass through each other, and then we see Aerith and Zack pass by each other, and obviously this is happening at the same time, but not in the same worlds, otherwise they'd be seeing Zack. But Aerith can sense Zack is alive. And for those that might not be familiar with the Final Fantasy VII story, Zack was Aerith's first love. So, what does all of this shit mean for the Remake Project? Who the fuck knows, man? One thing's for certain, at the end of this game, we defeated the Whisper Harbinger and the Watchmen of Fate. They are no longer controlling the story for the Remake Project, which means going into the second, third, and however many games there might be, they don't actually have to follow the original game's story. The Watchmen of Fate are no longer there to keep Destiny in line. Which means anything could happen. I've seen people talk about the possibility of Aerith surviving, which, I mean, it could happen. I'm definitely not saying it's gonna happen. But it could. With the Remake Project, there's no longer the Watchmen of Fate there to make sure that things like that take place. They could go that route. I don't know that they would, but we've already seen some characters who died in the original survive, like Biggs and Wedge. And we've seen characters that didn't die in the original die, but then come back to life because of the Watchmen of Fate, like Barrett. Or wasn't actually stabbed, or wasn't fatally stabbed. I don't know exactly what happened with Barrett, but either way, he did not die. The point of all this is going into Remake Part 2, we have no idea what they're going to do, and I'm actually kind of excited about that. Like, I hope they do something similar to the first game where it's a lot of the same story beats, but a bunch of new additional stuff. I personally don't want them to change too much, but that's coming from somebody who's been like a lifelong fan of FF7. I'll probably still enjoy it if they do. But there's just certain things from the original that I personally want to see remade in like this modern technology, modern graphics, and voice acting, like Barrett and Dine meeting. It's a scene I've referenced quite a few times in my videos, but it's one of my favorites from the original game. It's one of the most powerful scenes in the game, in my opinion, and it's just something that I hope to see fully fleshed out with maybe a Remake Part 2. So to kind of wrap it up, to give my thoughts on the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I absolutely loved it, man. I see now, after having finished the game, why they never really told us exactly what the Watchmen of Fate were. Because if they were to do that, then it might have ruined the game. But for us to defeat Fate itself at the end of the remake, and kind of open the doors for the sequels to be kind of anything, potentially, I personally enjoyed the hell out of it, man. The only thing I'm unsure of is how Zack surviving affects the Remake Project, since it seems like he survived in a different timeline. Like, why is that going to matter to the remake at all? Either way, my dudes, that's the video. I want to pass off to you guys. What were your thoughts on the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake? And do you have any other theories on things that are taking place, things that might happen, how Zack surviving is going to affect things? Leave your thoughts and more in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @DashingDavid. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Almost there, Cloud. We're almost there. Give me a smile, give me forever for a while, give me forever for a while. Quit